Something is wrong in Tucson, Arizona. You can feel it in the silence of a neighborhood that should be ordinary. A driveway, a front porch, a door left slightly open in the early hours of a February morning. And an 4-year-old woman gone. Not wandered off, not confused, gone. This is the case that has stopped investigators in their tracks, pulled in the FBI's most elite behavioral analysts, and left a family and an entire nation waiting for answers that have not come. This is the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, mother, widow, and the woman whose absence has exposed just how far a calculated, controlled mind will go to execute a plan years in the making. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Ola Detective Files. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel does not do surface-level coverage. We go deep. We go forensic. And we stay on a case until the truth surfaces. Now let's get into it. It is February 1st, 2026, Tucson, Arizona, approximately 2:30 inches the morning. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood is quiet. The kind of quiet that feels normal until it isn't. At that exact hour, something triggers. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker loses its connection to her phone. That signal, that small, steady, digital pulse that had been tracking her heart goes dark, just like that. No warning, no distress call, no noise reported by neighbors. Just silence where there should have been a heartbeat. By the time her family realizes she has not appeared for her scheduled online church service later that morning, the window has already closed. The trail is already cold. When investigators arrive at the residence, what they find is not chaos. It is precision. Biological traces are recovered at the entry point of the residence. A back door has been left propped open, not forced, not broken, propped, deliberately. And doorbell camera footage captures something that will become central to this entire investigation. A masked individual, gloved, carrying a backpack, tampering with the camera itself in the moments before Nancy vanishes. This was not a crime of opportunity. Every detail points to a person who had been here before, mentally, if not physically. Over 30,000 tips flood in within days. The FBI is called. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirms publicly this was a targeted abduction. 93 days later, there are no arrests, no named suspects. And the question that every investigator, every profiler, and every person following this case keeps returning to is the same one. Why her? Why Nancy? The answer, according to the FBI's most experienced behavioral analysts, does not begin on February 1st. It begins years earlier. In a mind that had already decided long before that night exactly what it was going to do. And that is where this investigation truly starts. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this case has reached. Before this case became headlines, before the FBI got involved, before the tips started flooding in by the thousands, there was just a woman living her life in the Arizona sun. Nancy Guthrie was not a public figure. She was not famous. She was not wealthy in her own right. She was a mother, a widow. A woman who had spent over 5 decades building a quiet, rooted life in Tucson, Arizona, and who, by every account, had no enemies. That detail matters. Hold on to it. Born on January 27th, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky, Nancy lived the kind of life that does not make the news. She raised 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. She buried her husband, Charles Guthrie, in 1988 after he passed away during a mining trip in Mexico. She did not remarry. She stayed in Tucson. She stayed close to her church. She stayed independent. At 84 years old, Nancy Guthrie was sharp, mentally present, active in her faith community. She was not a woman who needed to be watched over. She was a woman who had chosen deliberately to live on her own terms, in a home she knew, in a neighborhood she trusted, in a city she had called home for decades. And that independence, investigators would later note, may have been exactly what made her accessible. Her last confirmed movements paint a picture of an ordinary evening. On January 31st, 2026, the night before she vanished, Nancy took an Uber ride and attended a family dinner. She was dropped home at approximately 9:45 inches the evening. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. She walked through her front door and the night closed around her. By the next morning, she was gone. Now here is what you need to sit with for a moment. Investigators do not believe this was random. The FBI's behavioral analysts, the same unit that has spent decades studying the psychology of violent offenders, have been working this case from the behavioral side. And what they keep coming back to is this. The person who took Nancy Guthrie did not choose her because of who she was. They chose her because of who her daughter is. Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable faces in American broadcast journalism. And the thread that connects everything in this case, including a behavioral theory so specific, so calculated, that it reaches back years before February first ever arrived. But to understand that theory, you first need to understand what happened inside that house. January 31st, 2026, Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie steps out of an Uber at approximately 9:45 inches the evening after a family dinner. She walks through her front door. The neighborhood is still. Everything looks normal. It will not look normal for long. Investigators placed a critical window between 2 and 3, 0 inches the morning. That is when Nancy's pacemaker loses its synced connection to her mobile phone. In forensic terms, that signal loss is not a footnote. It is a timestamp. The closest thing investigators have to the exact moment everything changed. At that same window, doorbell camera footage captures a masked, gloved figure carrying a backpack approaching the property. They move directly toward the camera lens, not past it, toward it, and tamper with it, deliberately, calmly, without hesitation. That single action tells investigators everything. This was not impulsive. This was rehearsed. The back door is found propped open, not forced, propped. Biological traces are recovered at the entry point, and inside the residence almost no sign of disruption, which means Nancy was either incapacitated quickly or she opened that door herself. Ask yourself, what would make an 84-year-old woman open her door at 2:30 inches the morning without raising an alarm? By sunrise, she has not appeared. By mid-morning, she misses her church service, a routine she never broke. Her family drives over. The back door is still open. The silence hits them immediately. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirms it publicly within hours. This was a targeted abduction, planned, precise, and already hours ahead of law enforcement. When a case like this lands on the desk of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, it means local law enforcement has hit a wall. It means the evidence is there, but the picture it is painting requires a different kind of eye. Not just forensic, behavioral. The Behavioral Analysis Unit, based out of Quantico, Virginia, is the same division that pioneered criminal profiling in the 1970s. the same unit that sat across from some of the most dangerous offenders in American history and built a science out of understanding why people do what they do. These are not detectives in the traditional sense. They are readers of human behavior, pattern recognizers. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, they are the most important people in the room. What they are looking at is a behavioral signature: the camera tampering, the propped door, the clean interior, the precise timing. Each detail is a data point. And when you stack those data points together, a profile begins to emerge not of what happened, but of who is capable of it. The unit works a methodology called criminal investigative analysis. They study the crime scene not for what the offender left behind, but for what the offender's choices reveal about their psychology. Organized or disorganized, familiar with the victim or targeting from a distance, emotionally connected to the outcome or purely transactional. In this case, every behavioral marker points in one direction: organized, familiar, purposeful. And here is where the investigation takes its first sharp turn. Because the FBI's analysts are not just building a profile of an unknown subject. They are cross-referencing that profile against a specific theory, one that connects this crime directly to Nancy Guthrie's daughter. That theory changes everything. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a prison interview room: the hum of fluorescent lighting, the scrape of a metal chair, the weight of two people sitting across from each other, one with a badge, one with a history. And in that silence, the FBI's most experienced behavioral analysts have learned to listen for what is not being said. The prison interview is not an interrogation. It is a conversation with a purpose. And the purpose is simple to understand: not to judge, not to prosecute. To extract the behavioral blueprint of how a mind like this operates, what it wants, what it fears, what it cannot help but reveal. In the Nancy Guthrie investigation, the BAU's approach leans heavily on what decades of prison interviews have taught them about a very specific type of offender. One who targets not randomly, but relationally. One who fixates not on the victim directly, but on someone connected to the victim. Someone the offender cannot reach. Someone who represents something the offender believes they are owed. That profile has a name in behavioral science: proxy targeting. And it has appeared in some of the most complex abduction cases in FBI history. The interviews that shaped this theory were not conducted yesterday. They were built over decades, offender after offender sitting under that fluorescent light, eventually revealing the same pattern. The fixation starts small: a name, a face on a screen, a perceived connection that exists only in the offender's mind. And then it escalates, slowly, quietly, until one February morning, it does not feel slow at all. What did those interviews reveal about the specific behavioral markers in this case? That answer is coming. But first, the ransom notes. 3 ransom notes. That is what investigators are working with. 3 separate communications, each demanding money in exchange for Nancy Guthrie's safe return. On the surface, it looks like a straightforward kidnapping for financial gain, a motive, a demand, a negotiation, but the FBI's behavioral analysts are not convinced. Here is why. Ransom notes in genuine kidnapping cases follow a pattern. They are specific. They include proof of life. They set deadlines. They demonstrate that the person holding the victim has something to lose if the demands are not met. They are, in their own way, a contract. These notes do not fully fit that pattern. The language is inconsistent across all 3 communications. The demands shift, and critically, the proof of life provided is limited. To a behavioral analyst, that inconsistency is not a minor detail. It is a signal. It suggests either an offender who is improvising or multiple individuals involved with different levels of commitment to the plan. There is a third possibility that investigators have not ruled out, that the ransom notes are a layer of misdirection, a constructed narrative designed to point law enforcement toward a financial motive and away from something far more personal. Think about what that would mean. Someone organized enough to tamper with a camera, prop a door, and execute a clean abduction, suddenly sending inconsistent, shifting ransom demands. Does that feel like the same person? Does that feel like the same level of control? That contradiction is exactly what the FBI's profilers keep returning to, and it connects directly to the theory that has become the spine of this entire investigatio. Here is where this case stops feeling like a random crime and starts feeling like something far more calculated, far more personal, and far more disturbing in its logic. Savannah Guthrie has been the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show since 2012. Every morning, millions of people wake up and see her face. Her voice is familiar. Her presence is consistent. And for the vast majority of those millions, she is simply a television personality they enjoy watching over breakfast. But for a very specific type of mind, that familiarity becomes something else entirely. It becomes a relationship, one-sided, unreciprocated, but in the offender's internal world, completely real. The FBI's behavioral analysts have a term for this: erotomania, a delusional fixation in which an individual becomes convinced that a public figure has a personal connection to them. It does not require contact. It does not require acknowledgement. It feeds entirely on proximity, and when direct proximity is impossible, it finds another route. That route, in this theory, is Nancy Guthrie. If you cannot get to the person you are fixated on, you get to someone they love, someone whose disappearance will guarantee a response, someone whose absence will force the object of your fixation to feel something, to react, to finally, in the offender's mind, acknowledge that you exist. That is the theory investigators are working, and it is not speculative. It is grounded in decades of behavioral case studies, prison interviews, and threat assessment data compiled by the FBI's most experienced analysts. The profile that emerges from that theory is specific, detailed, and according to investigators, it matches someone already in the system. What does that profile look like? That is exactly where we are going next. When the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit builds a profile, it does not start with a name. It starts with a pattern, and patterns in behavioral science are remarkably consistent across offenders who share the same psychological architecture. So, what does the database say about someone who fits the profile emerging from the Nancy Guthrie case? The profile is male, most likely between the ages of 25 and 45, likely operating alone, or with one secondary individual who is less committed to the plan. He has a history of fixation behavior possibly documented through prior restraining orders, threatening communications, or previous contact attempts with a public figure. He is organized. He plans ahead. He is comfortable with technology, evidenced by the deliberate camera tampering, and he has likely conducted physical surveillance of the target location before February 1st. That last point is critical. The propped door, the knowledge of the camera's position, the precise timing window. None of that happens without prior reconnaissance. Someone walked that property before that night, possibly multiple times, possibly in plain sight, a jogger, a delivery driver, a neighbor nobody looked twice at. The database cross-reference narrows the field further. Individuals with documented fixation on Savannah Guthrie specifically, prior communications sent to NBC. Threat assessment flags raised by the network security team. These are not hypothetical leads. These are real files, real names, real histories. And somewhere inside that narrowing field of names, investigators believe the answer already exists. The question is not whether the profile is accurate. The question is whether the evidence collected so far is enough to move from a profile to a prosecution. That is where 30,000 tips come in. 30,000 tips. That is the number Pima County Sheriff's Office is working with. 30,000 individual pieces of information, each one requiring verification, cross-referencing, and follow-up. It is the kind of volume that sounds like progress until you are inside it. Because here is the reality of a high-profile tip line. The signal-to-noise ratio is brutal. For every credible lead, there are hundreds of false ones, well-meaning but inaccurate, deliberately misleading, or simply the product of a public that wants to help but does not have the information to do so effectively. Investigators are not discouraged. They are methodical. Every tip is logged. Every credible thread is pulled. Digital forensics teams are combing through phone records, financial transactions, and location data. The pacemaker signal loss has been submitted for deeper technical analysis. And the doorbell footage, degraded as it is being processed through enhancement technology. The investigation is not at a dead end, but it is at a pressure point. 93 days in, with no arrest and no confirmed location, the clock is not slowing down. And somewhere out there, the person who knows exactly what happened to Nancy Guthrie is still making choices, still watching, still calculating, which means this investigation is far from over. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 93 days. There are no arrests, there's no confirmed location, but there is a profile, there is a behavioral signature, there is a database narrowing toward a name, and there is an investigative team that has not stopped working a single day since February 1st. Cases like this do not close because the trail goes cold. They close because someone talks, because a detail that seemed insignificant suddenly connects to another detail, because the person responsible, no matter how organized, no matter how calculated, eventually makes a move that puts them inside the frame. To anyone watching this who has information, a name, a face, a conversation that felt wrong, the tip line is still open. Pima County Sheriff's Office. Every piece of information matters. And to the person responsible, behavior analysts will tell you the same thing every time. The profile is already built. The database is already narrowing. The only question left is timing. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And this investigation will not stop until those answers arrive. If this case has stayed with you, and it should share this video, leave a comment. Tell us where you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Because when this case breaks, and it will break, you want to be here when it does. This is Ola Detective Files. We stay on the case.